Hi, I'm Chef Lynn, and welcome to the Flavor Secrets Kitchen. Today we're cooking Cantonese braised pork with Karen.
Hello.
Hi Karen, thanks
Hi.
for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
This is such an easy dish that there isn't too much to do, so Karen's going to supervise while I prepare the dish and hopefully ask some questions that you might also have at home, so you're not banging on the glass saying, hey, what about this, what about that? But know also that if you ever have a question about a dish that's prepared on this show, you can email me at chef@flavorsecrets.com and I'll be happy to answer anything that you'd like to know. Okay, so we're cooking this whole dish today in a wok. And the wok has two pieces. The first is a ring, which holds the wok steady above the flame. So we want to center this right on the flame and then just set the wok on it. And then turn on the heat on high to start warming up the wok. Mm-hmm. So I think first we should talk about these ingredients. As you can see, there really aren't very many. Mm-hmm. But I really think we should go through them because one of the cameramen walked in this morning. He said, oh, so we're having chicken, chives, and rutabaga, right? Wrong. Actually, it's pork, green onion, and ginger. And I'll go through these other things in a minute, but first let's talk about the pork. These are bite-sized pieces, as you can see, large bite-sized pieces, because this dish is intended to be eaten with chopsticks. Okay, you get to do that later. Do you know?
Dear.
Is that
I have to put an elastic band around them so I don't get in trouble.
No, so they're large pieces so that they're easy to grab and pick up with a chopstick. So think about that when you're cutting up your pork. And I also have, it's a pork rib, but I took a meatless one called a country style rib. They come about this big in a rectangular shape and there's no bone in them. And the reason I did that is because American people are not that used to putting a big piece of bone in their mouth and chewing off the meat and then taking it back out. It's not so much fun to eat it that way. So I wanted to have a dish that was easy to eat and presented easily for Western people.
So does it actually say on the packet, pork rib, when you buy
yes,
it?
It says country style. Right, it says country style pork rib. But the thing that's really important about changing this part of the recipe, actually let me back up for a second. The original recipe called for just a regular rib, which is a pretty tough cut of meat, chopped up. I mean, you would take a heavier cleaver than this and literally chop up the bones into bite-sized pieces. But since I didn't want to do that, this type of rib is a lot leaner, which means that the cooking time will be less.
Right.
Okay? So I'm only going to have this in the wok maybe 25 to 30 minutes, whereas if you use the tougher cut of meat, you're going to want to leave it in there for about 45 minutes.
So there'll be no bone marrow. So in the traditional dish, would there be bone marrow in the?
Probably a little bit. Well, the bone marrow really comes from a different cut of the bone.
Right.
But yes, you're right in the sense that you will sacrifice a little tiny bit of taste, but the difference in having to get the bone out of your mouth to me isn't worth it. So I go ahead and use the more tender cut of meat. And then also I have the advantage that it cooks faster. Okay, so we've also got some oil. I started this a little soon, so let's turn this down just a little bit so I don't roast to death here. I have a little bit of oil, and in a Chinese dish, you really wouldn't use olive oil.
Right.
You could, certainly, if you wanted to, and you were preparing it for your family at home, but if you're preparing it for traditional Chinese people, they're not going to like the taste of that olive oil. It isn't native to the country, and it typically is not used in Chinese dishes. Okay, we've also got some soy sauce. We've got some sugar, and we've got a little bit of Marin cooking wine. I actually used, Marin is a type of sake that has some spices and things in it, and it's used for making many Chinese and Japanese dishes. And then I used some Kikkoman soy sauce. And then we have a couple cups of water, and that's all that goes into this dish. Gosh. And the only thing we have to really prepare, I've got everything measured out, and I cut the pork, but the only other thing that you have to do is to prepare the ginger. So the way to do that is just to cut off a piece. I cut off a chunk, maybe about an inch long. I won't worry about that little knob that was on there. It's not worth trying to peel that. And then I'll peel off the hard part of the ginger and then chop it. Now this is a very thin cleaver, and you can use it just like a French knife. See how I'm rocking it, just like we learned in class how to use a French knife? And then I'm going to chop this up kind of small. You can even use it this way, just like a knife. And then I want to crush this ginger as much as I can. You can also, sometimes it'll go flying around the kitchen if you do this, but if you put your hand on it like that, as you press down, then it usually doesn't fly too much. Okay, this ginger is a tiny little bit dry, so I'm finding that it didn't crush real well, so I'll spend a little bit more time chopping it.
I bought ginger that's been really stringy, almost like wood. So it's just really old, I guess. But I've still tried to persevere with it. But how do you know if your ginger is old or?
You can tell by looking at it. As you can see, this has been in my refrigerator for a week or two, and it's starting to kind of dry out around the edges. It's still perfectly okay to use it, but it will be a little bit harder to work with. The more fresh it is, the more moist it'll be, and the easier it'll be to crush like that.
Right.
Okay. This will all absorb into the sauce, so I'm not going to worry about getting it really small. The nice thing about using a cleaver is then you don't need any kind of a scoop or anything to get whatever you're chopping over into your pan, because it's kind of like a two-in-one knife. Okay, my wok is really hot now. I can feel the heat emanating. I'm going to go ahead and put the oil in. Let the oil heat up, which doesn't take very long. You can see, can you see it's already boiling? It's a good idea when you have a wok, when you use a wok, to have a mitt or something around to grab it with, because these handles get really hot. As you can see, it's kind of smoky. I'm going to have to turn this fan on just low a little bit. Now I'm going to throw my meat in here. And then I'll use this wok spatula. As you can see, it's wide here, and so that's designed to move a lot of food at once. And we're going to get a nice sear. You can actually hear it sizzling, or jumping if you want to use the French term, saute. And you don't have to spend a lot of time stir frying this. Don't be afraid to just let it sit, because I want to get some brown on the meat, okay? It's perfectly fine for it to sit a minute so that it starts to get brown. Now you don't usually have to tip this wok, but in order for the camera to look inside the wok, I'll be tipping it a little bit.
Do you have to season your wok in some way?
Yes. Before you use your wok, you should coat it with oil and put it in the oven.
Oh.
And bake it for about an hour, a couple of times. You can see a little bit of the seasoning from the wok came off on there. I'll just take it off and throw it away. It's not a big deal. Let this sit so that it gets brown, just like when you're searing a roast or something for braising. This is actually the same technique. It's just done in the wok instead of the oven. So braising is basically searing meat, putting it in a Dutch oven or some other kind of an oven-proof vessel, then adding some liquid. That's what braising means, liquid. Cooking with liquid for a long period of time. And it's usually for these tougher cuts of meat. So I'll stir this up again. There you can see, it's starting to get brown. I want it to get just a little bit of brown all over. It doesn't have to be a real heavy sear in this case, because the meat's pretty tender. And I want it to be okay in there long enough to develop the sauce. So now, to make our sauce, what we'll do is just put our ginger in there. Stir that around for a minute. Let it cook for a minute.
How much ginger did you use, Lynn?
I used about an inch.
Right.
I just cut off. So I probably had 2 or 3 tablespoons of ginger by the time I was finished. And then I'll let the ginger soften.
Smells good already.
Now another point is, if you were braising something like a pot roast, you would have put salt and pepper on the raw meat before you seared it, and that would sear in the spices.
Right.
But in Asian dishes, you hardly ever need to add salt, because they often contain soy sauce. And the soy sauce is really salty, so if you salt your meat, you're likely to end up with a dish that's way too salty. Okay? So now this is getting nice and brown. Stir fry it again. It's called stir frying because you stir while you fry. Okay.
So this is constant now, making this meal. You can't walk away and read a book for half an hour. You've got to be on top of the whole.
Well, you can as soon as you'll see in just a second.
Okay.
You will be able to read a book for half an hour. Okay, so we used our oil. Now I've got, remember, 3, 2, 1. 3 tablespoons of soy sauce, 2 tablespoons of sugar, and 1 tablespoon of the sake or any kind of rice cooking wine, okay? And then 2 cups of water. So 3 tablespoons of soy sauce. I'm just going to dump that on there. 2 tablespoons of sugar, and realize that this helps, it not only makes the dish sweet, it also helps to thicken the sauce.
Oh.
Okay? And then 1 tablespoon of the sake. So throw that in there. Stir again. So that you coat the meat. You can see that the meat is coated, and we've got this sauce down here. The only other thing we'll do, make sure we don't have any sugar on the sides. The only other thing we need to do is to add 2 cups of water and then throw on our top. And that's it.
That's it.
Now we've got 45 minutes to wait.
Oh, I see.
Except that I'm going to turn the heat down because I use such tender meat. And I'm going to turn it down to a little less than medium-high. So that will cook now probably for more like 35 minutes. And at the end, it'll start to go really fast, so be careful and keep an eye on it so that it doesn't burn. But we're totally finished with our dish. The only other thing we have to do is to start our rice. And the kind of rice that I'm using today is some that I got in the Japanese market. You can find it also in Korean markets and really any sort of Asian market, and it's kind of a short grain sticky rice, and you mix it 2 to 1, so 2 cups of liquid for 1 cup of water. And I'll put you can see back here I've got this little I've got a container. I'm only going to make 1 cup of rice, so I want to have a small container. If you use too large of a container, it can burn.
Right, yes.
So make sure that the size of your pan is commensurate with how much rice you're using. So this is a sticky rice, so we'll use 2 cups of water to 1 cup of rice. And normally when you make a different kind of rice, like jasmine rice or a longer grain rice that will be slippery and not so sticky when you're finished, you would use 1.5 cups of water to 1 cup of rice. Okay, so we gotta wait just a second.
Do you have to wash this rice before you start to cook
That's a good question. We've done that in other classes where we've washed the rice, and it's a good question. With the sticky rice, you don't really have to. And actually, you can, if you want to, remove the talc by washing it. But I usually don't with the sticky rice because I want as much goop in there as possible. And remember, this is a dish that we're going to be eating with chopsticks.
Yes.
So if our rice is too slippery, we won't be able to pick it up.
Okay.
And I mean, actually, chasing little grains of rice is a good way to practice working with your chopsticks, but today I don't want to have that. So all I have to do is bring this water to a boil. It's going to take another minute or 2. And while we're waiting for that water to boil, I'll just chop up the garnish. And I'll wipe off my cleaver here. Careful not to cut yourself. The cleaver's really, really sharp. At least mine is. Yours might not be. And this will be the garnish. This is just a spring onion, and what I want to do is cut this on an angle so that it makes a pretty garnish. Okay? So again, I'm using this just like a French knife, and you can cut it like that, or the longer you make your cuts, the longer you get, and it will make your dish look really professional to just add a tiny little bit of garnish. And this 1 onion could be enough garnish for 4 plates. As you can see, it makes quite a bit. Just take it all the way to the end and use it all. Now our garnish is ready.
Now I know you bought your cleavers in China, so where would we find something that would be reasonably priced here? I've seen them, but they've been terribly expensive, and if you don't use it...
Cleavers?
Yeah.
Well, any kitchen store, I would Google it online, and you can find actually the same Chinese store. I can't remember the name of it, but this store ships. Oh. And this cleaver was, I want to say, $20 or something like that. It wasn't terribly expensive. You can find cleavers at Williams-Sonoma's or La Tabla, Chef's store online, and you can also find the Chinese stores that have them sometimes cheaper, not always, but sometimes. So I would just Google it, and I think you'll find lots of options. Excuse me.
So is the weight of the cleaver important? Do you need a heavy?
Right. There are different cleavers for different purposes. For example, let's pull one out of the drawer here. Feel that one.
Oh gosh,
it's really heavy. And then feel this one.
This feels like a hollow handle, and this feels solid.
Right, this feels almost weighted, doesn't it? So this one is for chopping, the lighter one, and this one is for chopping bones.
Oh, right.
Okay, so I wouldn't really use this one for chopping. You can see it's thicker here too. The blade is thicker, and it doesn't work as well for chopping. And I guess you can tell the difference because this one has a hole here, the heaviest one, for hanging.
Yes.
I mean, that's how I would tell on mine. It's not. That's not always the case, but you can also just pick it up. Okay, our water is boiling, and I've got a top. Did I not pull out a top? Let me grab a top for that.
It's behind you.
Oh, of course. I'm more organized than I thought. All right, so there's my top. It's all ready. My water's boiling. All I have to do is put a cup of rice in there. I already had 2 cups of water. Put the top on and turn it to low, and then set my timer for 20 minutes. And that will be perfect rice every time.
You don't take the top off or stir?
No, absolutely. Don't take the top off, don't stir, don't peek. My husband always gets in trouble for that. He'll come and he'll just want to peek, and sometimes it's not a good idea to peek. Okay, so whenever, I always set timers for everything because it's so easy to go start reading that book and forget, or get a phone call and oh my gosh, the rice is burned. So I always set a timer and set it either on top or beside whatever it is I'm cooking. So you can see I've got this other, well, I guess I didn't set the timer for this one, did I? But I should. So this is going to go 35 minutes, and this is sitting by here, so I know when that goes off and I come, that's what I'm looking for.
Really good idea.
Okay, now I didn't want people to have to wait 35 minutes to see the results, so we've already made this dish earlier. So if we can just make a little room here, we'll show you the finished product. Move these out of the way. So we've got our garnish close by, and over here I have a bowl of rice. That's how it turns out, and you can see, we should actually show this. See how it sort of sticks together? This is why it's important if you want to eat with chopsticks to get this sticky rice. It's not like you just put more water in long grain rice to get it to be sticky. You have to have a special kind of rice for that, and I think that's important to know. And then over here I have the finished product. As you can see, the soy sauce, and oh, it smells really good, doesn't it? So exciting doing this because then we get to eat it. And then our sauce is thick and runny.
So the water just evaporated, and
right, the liquid reduced, and the sugar, as I said earlier, helped it to thicken. So this was only, we used 1 pound of meat for this. Let me use a different cloth here. It's always nice to wipe the rim a little bit, makes your dish look a little more professional. Wipe the rim off, and then we'll just garnish it with our onion here. So this recipe would be enough in my house for 2 people for dinner. In some people's houses, particularly a Chinese house, probably 4 people for dinner, because Asian people don't tend to eat as much meat as we do.
That was delicious. So, I guess the key to this is being prepared, having everything chopped up. That's where you put your time in, really, to have everything ready. It's no good starting and then thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't got this, and run to get it. You've got to be prepared ahead of time.
When you're working with the wok, always mise en place or preparing everything ahead is huge, because things go in quickly. You start sauteing the thing that takes the longest, and then you add the next lengthwise and the next lengthwise, and then the one that just has to be sauteed quickly at the end. Then you add any sauces, put the cover on, and you've got a beautiful dish.
It does look beautiful.
Great. Okay, well, we'll look forward to trying this then. And any other questions?
I think you've answered everything.
Great.
I'm looking forward to trying it too.
Okay, and I hope you will at home. I'm Chef Lynn. This is the Flavor Secrets Kitchen. Enjoy.